Kia ora everyone, no mai haere mai and welcome to another Maven Time. It's been a while since we've had a Maven Time and I'm super excited. Today we have one of our newest Mavens of the fundraising nest, Kaye Dunn with us today. And I'm excited for you to hear a bit about Kaye and who she is and what she does. So it's not my job to find that out. We want our guests to tell us. Kaye, welcome to Maven Time.
Kia ora. Kia ora tēnā koe Michelle, kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Kaye, so you are the founder of Making Everything Achievable. Tell us about it. Where did this come from?
So I have a background working in government for the first part of my career, so about 8 years, and then the final 2 years I worked in the for purpose space.
Yeah.
And so whilst I was in that space, I suffered a couple of amazing career heartbreaks. And those career heartbreaks were where the organisation didn't have the funding to be able to continue to employ me. And in 2010, I guess I had a bit of a implosion/explosion. My relationship kind of disintegrated. The role that I was in couldn't continue funding me. And I just thought, I'm sick of having my destiny and my mana in the hands of others. So I reached out to my elder brother, Mita. I said, look, bro, you've got some amazing skills. I have some skills. I'm a dreamer. He's the
Yeah.
doer. And perhaps we can weave our skills together. So we just finished hosting the first National Māori Housing Conference in Rotorua. And as a result of that event, we kind of set off on a bit of a journey and then decided to establish MEA. So Making Everything Achievable is actually an acronym.
Yeah.
And it's but the whole meaning is around MEA, and MEA means anything. And it was really important to us that we had something that could describe the variety of ideas, opportunities that we wanted to enter into, but also MEA at a practical level. When Māori are communicating, we'll say,
Yeah.
oh, hia ha te mea nui o te ao, what is the greatest thing in the world? Or ho mai te mea, pass me the thing. Now, if you can see people having a conversation, they're talking about the MEA, if you're not sharp, if you're not listening carefully, and if you're not using your observation skills, you actually won't know what the MEA is.
Right.
So it's also very an active descriptor, which is inviting people to be open to listen and to really understand what is the MEA for you and me, and how can we work together to make everything achievable. And that's how we emerged into the world in 2010.
I love it. I mean, yeah, when you talk about, the fundraising nest, birds of a feather flock together, and I've got kind of goosebumps there, like taking destiny into your own hands. It's my mantra too. I've done it since a young age. I decided to put myself in care when I was 13 because I wanted a better life. And coming to the fundraising nest, much the same. It's like, actually, I just want to do my thing the way I want to do it. And I love that kind of, I love that concept. So I first heard you, I think, a few years ago. I was on a podcast in New Zealand, and you were one of the guests as well. And you just blew my mind when I heard you talk. And I was like, who is this Whiney? She's amazing. You're so articulate and so just down to earth in what you do. So what is it that kind of motivates you to do what you do?
I think what motivates me the most is a deep reverence and love for my family and my community,
Yeah.
and understanding history, colonization, injustice, inequity, and how that has influenced the way that many members of my family, many members of the communities that I'm a part of, have had to make decisions.
Yeah.
And in particular, how poverty of mind and spirit and poverty of opportunity also forces people's backs against the wall. And when your back is against the wall, how you think and how you operate is severely impacted. So part and parcel of our role in MEA as an Indigenous social impact agency is how do we use our sense of agency, how do we use our influence to help reshape legislation, shape policy, shape thinking, shape governance, shape approaches, behaviours, practice, which is the mea. How do
Yeah.
we help influence the mea and create a mea together to help make the world better?
Yeah.
Our primary focus is around the upliftment and healing and restoration of planet, people, and community. And if everything that we do is in alignment with our core values and those particular practices, then I know that we're on the right track.
Yeah. Beautiful. You talk about different levels of poverty. When I worked as a youth worker in the East End of Glasgow, one of the things I found the hardest was we're trying to break down second and third generation xenophobia, sectarianism that was attached to some real entrenched things. But the biggest was the aspirational poverty. They didn't believe that they could be what they wanted to be, and that was really hard, or they wanted to be a celebrity, or they really set the bar low for themselves in terms of what they could aspire to be. And I loved seeing the change and taking them through the process of having ownership of their future. And do you see, have you seen a big change even since in 2010? Are you hopeful? Oh, I think we've lost your mic there, Kaye Maree. I think you're on mute. Have you muted your mic? No.
There we go. Sorry,
Oh,
team.
here we go. We've lost
Um,
you for a little minute.
so I feel that I always feel hopeful. I always can see the importance of hopefulness, innocence, and vision. And I think that those three elements are what really helps to drive us forward. And I love the words from one of our elders from the far north, Hekenuku Mai Busby, who was a master navigator and also a waka builder. And he says something that, when you're in a waka and you're traveling along, uh, when you can see land, then you can be comforted by that. But when you're out in the open sea, you can't see your destination. And this is where things start to become scary for some, and their real personalities start to emerge during that fearful time of not knowing where to go, and potentially not believing in the capabilities of your team, or losing sight of the vision or the true destination of where you're heading towards. So I think that that's really important, and why values are so important and leading back into when things get really hard. I think within our communities, particularly the Māori community, there are so many amazing accelerated developments happening around language revitalization, and language maintenance, culture, speech making, broadcasting, business and entrepreneurship, access to capital, collaboration. We've seen unprecedented collaboration as a result of COVID, which has had
Yeah.
it's been terrible, but it's also had some really amazing impacts as well. So, as a result of all of these moving parts, there's been such wonderful developments happening, but equally, we still have extraordinary numbers of our people incarcerated, far too many of our children in state care, far too many of our women and men still stuck in domestic violence households. So equally, whilst
Yeah.
there's a lot of hopefulness, I hold this kind of shadow side of the nation, and I think we're always stepping in between these two. And I try to ensure that I don't lose sight of this part.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be, optimistic and
Yeah.
hopeful, but I think that that's a real privileged position to be in when we're not really thinking about our other families and our people that don't have access to the same levels of resources, support, or
Yeah.
tools that we may have amongst ourselves right now.
Absolutely. So when we talk about fundraising, one of the things that I can't comment on because I don't know enough knowledge about it but I always felt that I suspect that in Te Ao Māori they don't call themselves fundraisers because that's not really, it's quite what is a fundraiser? It's someone who has a relationship with someone who describes the change or the impact they want to make, and they have a corridor, they have a conversation, and they do business. I would love to get your take on that. You know, what does a fundraiser look like in your world?
I think that Māori are exceptional at fundraising
Yeah,
and have been doing that for a very long time because we had to. We didn't
yeah,
have the same levels of access to capital that other communities had. So we had to rely upon ourselves. We've got expert fundraisers when it comes to marae communities. And those communities are super amazing at doing things like Battens Up and Hangi and,
yeah,
cultural performances. During the war, to support the war effort, many communities gathered together and fundraised, not only to send things over to the soldiers, but also performance troops that needed to fundraise for themselves to be able to travel. We've got kapahaka groups that are amazing at fundraising also.
yeah,
The part, however, where I think there's the opportunity is we've tended to fundraise internally amongst ourselves. So we're always kind of turning to Auntie, Uncle, Kazi,
yeah,
Nanny, Papa for support, and so within our own communities, we try our best and are often really successful at that. The opportunity that I've seen is what does it look like when we actually move from our own community into others, and so a really good example of that. A few years ago, when I was working at Mighty Women's Development Inc., we experimented in a partnership with Pledge Me, which is a crowdfunding platform, and we co-created the very first Indigenous focused approach to crowdfunding, and we called that Tā Koha, because Tā Koha to Koha is very different from asking for money. Koha is a gift and to be gifting. So the art of giving and the
yeah,
practice of giving was the way that we framed, first and foremost, this idea of crowdfunding. So we go, crowdfunding, that sounds
yeah,
weird, out of it. So we kind of reframed that. And that was a big conversation when we traveled around the country and we asked communities what their thoughts were. Some were like, I don't feel comfortable with you using that term,
yeah,
tā koha, inside a Pākehā or Western environment. So we had to think quite hard about that feedback. And then equally, we had other communities that said, if this is a way for us to attract opportunity into our communities that would never know that we exist, it would never know anything about our project or our work, we're really excited about that possibility.
yeah,
So we trialed that. And that's one example of utilising our Māori concepts and ideas into these different frameworks. The other area where I've seen it being utilised, which wasn't so well received, was the idea of time banking. And
yeah,
time banking is, where we use our time as credits. So instead of actually transferring cash between hands, I walk your dog,
yeah,
Michelle, and for that I will receive a 1 hour time credit, and
yeah,
I can spend that time credit on anybody else within the time bank community. So it's a really amazing, simple idea. It was an idea developed by an amazing human called Edgar Khan. It was tested in the Bronx and other underserved communities for the very reason is that those communities did not have access to capital, but also he recognised that the most undervalued parts of society is the most critical element of holding society
yeah,
up. So, how do you value care? How do you value love? How do you value time? Those
yeah,
aren't aspects that we include on our balance sheet. So, he developed the time bank, and I loved the idea. And I remember I went and talked about this with a community that I went and visited on the East Coast. I won't say where,
yeah,
but I'd shared the idea about this time bank. I was like, hey, man, this is such a cool
yeah,
idea. And the fire turned back around. She goes, "Oh, he whakaaro Pākehā tēnā. That's a Pākehā construct.
yeah,
We're not interested in time banking." And I listened to her because she was quite right in that our people, and this is kind of coming back to this idea around fundraising, our people are actually amazing and highly skilled at fundraising from amongst our own families and communities.
yeah,
Our culture also enables us to gift, especially when it comes to tangihanga, when people pass away. But the third aspect is mahi aroha. We're also a highly voluntary community as well. And therefore, if you start counting
Yeah.
the volunteer
Your value
time,
on that is a whole
yeah,
different
that
thing,
makes
isn't
things
it?
really difficult. And another amazing academic, Whatarangi Winiata, had done this brilliant paper which analyses the true value of the work that is undertaken on a marae. So the economic value of voluntary work on a marae. And he said, look, if you thought of these as event centres and the
Hmm.
amounts of people that work on a marae,
Yeah.
3 to 4 days, sometimes a whole week, with no pay, they do that out of their own love for their community and for their marae, then the significance and the amount of money that it would take to run these amazing marae event
Yeah.
centres is would well outstrip what it actually does. So there's all of this kind of
Hmm.
hidden work and hidden elements. And so when it comes back to fundraising, um, what I want to help normalise, particularly for Māori communities, is that we've been doing fundraising forever, so it's not
Yeah.
actually a normal alien concept. Sometimes other groups and stakeholders, audiences use different language. So if we
Yeah.
learn the reo of the fundraiser philanthropic community,
Yeah.
then that can help us tell our stories better. And I think the third part is that we are deserving. Our people are deserving of investment from wherever,
Yeah.
because of the amount of impact and, again, hidden work that's been undertaken. That if it wasn't done, and we have to step in lieu of government or other organisations. It's the aunties, uncles, volunteers that are running their support programs down at the community hall, or those language
Yeah.
programs for the mums and dads, or the Dress for Success programs, or the programs that aren't funded by
Yeah, we're
government,
just
simply
helping a
us people
friend.
set up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was invited onto a radio show a couple of months back, and they wanted to debate. The headline of the day was, "Why are Australians, why are New Zealanders more generous than Australians?" So they were looking at the annual giving in monetary terms, and I said, "Well, actually, you're wrong, because the World Giving Index. What I love about that is that it takes in three things. It's how much money is raised, how much time is volunteered, and how many people do something to help a friend. And then when you add all of those up, you have a very different picture of the most generous country in the world. And I think, yeah, because volunteering and doing something to help someone is far higher than the amount of money that's raised. And I think it's so important that we include that, because the world would grind to a halt without any of that. I love to hear. Yeah, I think it's wonderful what you that's just happens when you talk about philanthropy, in the sense that major gifts, or fundraising has all these different segments, or the where about leaving a gift in your will to charities and things. How's that perception growing or changing within your community?
I think bequeathing of your wealth into charitable causes, I'm not sure how normalised that is within Māori
Yeah,
communities. I also equally don't know how many high net worth individuals bequeath their wealth into Māori causes, but I'm not
yeah,
saying it hasn't been done. It's just that I don't know about them, but I'm certain that it's been happening somewhere, somehow. I wonder if, and I'm just interested, and it's probably an exploratory question,
yeah,
that perhaps the reason why we aren't into or so focused on
yeah,
bequeathing our wealth into the future is, obviously, one, our people die earlier, but secondly, our wealth is demonstrated by how much we give away and what we do right now.
yeah,
So I think often people are focusing their efforts and energies on the well-being of their children, their grandchildren, their homes, their community. And so they're either investing, again, their time or their energy. And if there are institutions that have been stood up, which, again, last beyond the lifetime of an individual, that's often our marae.
yeah,
Those are the communities that that have been stood up by our ancestors, or have been crafted in the spirit of our ancestors, and a place to hold the memory of our ancestors as well, and a place for us to commune and remember, celebrate, to grieve together, then that's kind of, an example of how some Māori wealth might be demonstrated by what we leave behind and what we give away. And that would probably be a similar story in other First Nations and Indigenous
Yeah,
communities as well. So if we're lucky enough to leave something behind and give it somewhere, then that's amazing. But I think that
yeah,
there's a lot of equity work that needs to be done to enable that level of gifting from our
yeah.
communities.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So you're going to be joining us in Auckland in just a couple of weeks, talking about relationships and building Indigenous relationships. For charities and organisations who have their donor pool, they're very white, they're very middle class, they're certain age group. Um, we're all people. We all, most of us are good people, and like you said, we want to give in any way that we can. So how do we bridge that kind of? How do we open the door of kind of commonality between supporting the causes that we care about across communities?
I think that we've got to get better at telling stories as
Yeah,
well. I'm saying generally Māori. I think we, as I said, we've got some amazing world-class developments in broadcasting. And Māori broadcasting is probably, I would say, some of the best demonstrations of storytelling in the world. And so, how do we equally feel less shy
yeah,
about sharing the great things that we're doing on the ground? And it's hard because we are also trained to not talk about our own sweetness,
yeah,
because other people do that for us and on our behalf. So I think we could, as a community, continue to improve upon our storytelling. But so there's a lot of content and stories here. What we haven't quite got is the bridge between the community and all of these other communities that often I find have no idea,
yeah,
and they have a particular view about Māori, which has been skewed by their own lived experience, their own trauma, and unfortunately what they see on television, both good and bad. And so within that particular limited construct and limited viewpoint, then they craft this whole narrative inside their minds about who we are and what we're
yeah.
about. So I feel it's really important that all New Zealanders dip their toe and their ear and their heart
Mhm.
into Māori media, because it's a beautiful place for capturing a lot of the amazing work that's happening on the ground. I think equally it can be accelerated through meaningful friendship,
Yeah,
partnerships, which forms the basis for really strong relationships. So, I'm going to help you because I believe in what you do, but equally, if I feel connected to you
mhm.
at an emotional level as well, and I can really see how hard you're trying, and also I can feel and see the impact of your work, then the chance of me reaching into my pocket and pulling out
Yeah,
whatever I've got to support you to continue your work, because I feel that I'm doing something good to support you, that's
mhm.
awesome. And I want to see that happening as a bridge builder, as a
Yeah.
Maven, moving between
Yes,
communities to say,
absolutely.
how can we build bridges? How can we open doorways? How can we have safe, open conversations for learning and exchange?
Absolutely. I love it. And just before we wrap up, I came to I've got a New Zealand passport. So I'm so proud of it. I lived in Aotearoa for 16 years, but I'm very, very conscious that it wasn't my country. I tried to embrace, well, I did. My husband's great at, we believe in Te Reo, but I'm very aware that it's not my world. And I really want to learn how to, I think part of me gets a bit frightened that I'm going to upset someone, or it's that kind of, that creating that safe space to say, I don't know about this, but what you're doing is fucking awesome, and I want to be part of it, regardless of where I come from, where I'm going to. We've got this moment that we like the same, we want the same things from people. So I think guidance and understanding how to respectfully feel part of what's going on is that's just my personal challenge. But I'm sure, I think a lot of people in my space feel the same. Like we're all doing what we do because we really give a shit about humans. and it's
Yeah.
working together to do that in the right way.
I think that, you might upset people and you might
Yeah,
not get it right all the time, and it's okay. So I think equally, those that are working in this space, um, you got to get thicker skin,
yeah,
like this is not a playground for, for those that are hypersensitive to receiving feedback. And
yeah,
sometimes feedback might not always be how we want it to come.
yeah,
That could be a yell. I
yeah,
mean, I had this question posed to me last week around, what does leadership look like in Māori communities? And I thought, oh my gosh, don't ask me that question because
yeah,
it's so varied.
yeah,
But if there's anybody that's going to kick your ass and make you and remind you about what's important, it's definitely our elders, our kuia kaumātua,
yeah,
our pakeke. They are part and parcel of living these lives, of reminding us about what's okay and what's not. So
yeah,
they'll let you know, and it might not always be waha. They might not say something. It could just be a look.
yeah,
It could be just held silence, or they might just not look at you at all. So my point being is that if you get some tongue lashings from somebody because you stepped on somebody's toes, that does come with the territory. But I also think if you enter into something in the spirit of curiosity and a willingness to learn, then that also has its own kind of safety mechanism wrapped around it, and it's okay.
it does work. I worked as a youth worker when I first came up here, up in Strathmore in Wellington, and I got some funding to take a group of young people up to the mountain for the first time to see the snow, and they were challenging me all the time. They're like, Michelle, you don't have a clue about our culture. And I was being really nice and like, okay, just, I was like, hang on a minute. Do you know where I come from? I come from Scotland. We have clans and we have tartans and we have, and I was like, so I don't understand. And they were like, okay, cool. It was, yeah, I kind of lost my cool a little bit and said, I don't have your culture, but I've got a culture that's very similar in terms of what we eat, and some of our Kaye and our iwis and clans are very similar, and that kind of that brought things back down a bit, and they're like, oh yeah, we get it, okay, cool, we can work with that. So yeah, it's Kaye, thank you so much for joining us today. We were going to be in Auckland 2 weeks tomorrow. Nestfest is going to Auckland for one day and then back down to Wellington. Bit of a road trip. There's going to be quite a gang of us on the road. We've got 5 speakers. We will all be staying up in Auckland and then down to Wellington. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to carrying on these conversations. And if you do make the Nestfest, come and say hi, and the tickets are on sale. And we look forward to catching up with Kaye again next time.
Thank you all.
Ka
Mori
kite.
ora. Bye.